What happened? Numerous authors and commentators have addressed the question of what happened to us, meaning Western man. Any discussion along these lines generally focuses on at least one of three main contributors to the malaise. We will look at each of these influences and discuss them in detail, then offer an alternative position. The three negative influences have been universal suffrage, gay rights, and the civil rights movement. The first thing that we notice is that all of these influences are tied up with human rights and all seem reasonable when they were initially brought to our attention. If one group has the right to vote, why not everyone? Except this comparison is patentably false. To begin with, the extremes of dictatorship and universal suffrage are a false dichotomy. The idea of an absolute dictatorship is only used to justify a broadening of the voter base. No dictator ever had absolute power. There is always an inner circle. How much power the central figure had and how much influence his advisors had, is impossible to say. Orders can be issued, but there is a lengthy chain of command to go through before they are carried out. Regardless, the legitimacy of the dictator and the legitimacy of the people are not grounded in the same metaphysics. The dictator's power is martial. The power of the people is pragmatic and relative and has more to do with political stability. The power of the people often relies on the power of the state to protect or permit their political power. In other words, the vaunted power of the people is usually at the mercy of the political leader. The truth of this is seen in how quick many Western nations became tyrannical during COVID and how draconian policing becomes when the left feels its political power is being threatened. Several Western countries are now creating political prisoners. People who are in jail because they hold the wrong political views. Should women be allowed to vote, is the wrong question. Ought all men be allowed to vote, was also the wrong question. Now, we are asking, ought non-citizens and children be given the right to vote? No one is asking if anyone has the right to vote, and if so, on what basis? The trouble is, it is easy to claim Joe has no right to dictate what an entire country ought to do. It's easy to persuade the rest of us that tyranny is wrong. But does that mean the tyranny of the majority is somehow more virtuous? But everyone cannot be given what they want. When everyone talks, no one is listened to. There is a mindset behind the common view of democracy that is troubling. Democracy only makes sense and is justified if everything belongs to everyone. Democracy assumes socialism or communism. Democracy assumes the world is a shared pie and everyone is entitled not only to a slice but to the disbursement of the pie. Democracy does not care where the world came from or how its wealth was made, it only considers how what exists ought to be allocated. This is insane. We allow private enterprise to create the wealth, then periodically we all get together to decide how it ought to be allocated. We have justified one insanity by the desire to eliminate another one. No private person has the right to own a nation or a people. But if the dictator has no right to rule absolutely, no group has the authority to give him this right or to give themselves this right. We cannot justify tyranny by expanding it to a larger proportion of the populace. Tyranny was eroded by the divine right of kings giving away to a convocation of nobles. This was expanded to include major property owners. Later the vote was given to all men and later to women. The age of majority was played around with, but generally, most mature persons are now permitted to vote in elections in all civilized nations. But if the voice of the leader is considered to be just one voice among many, what gives a collection of voices greater authority? What rights have the majority got that do not belong to the king? In fact, the authority of the king was based on the idea he, and he alone, owned all property under his authority. The king was considered a private owner. We know this to be a false claim, but the lie does not make it true that the people own the nation. The people no more own what they did not create than the most divine of rulers. God created the assets of the world, and the labor of men create the world's equity. No one has the right to decide the disposition of assets than they do to steal the parties. Democracy, of the power of the majority, no more gives society this right than the ruler acts directly. Gay rights led to the transgender movement and all of the associated rights based on gender identity. But this eliminates all rights based on sex, as well as all expectations. No one can expect anything based on their sexual identity. Those the roots of the family are destroyed. Civil rights led to intersectional identities and rights based on the level of victimization a person could claim, based on physical factors. These are unearned rights. In a sense, they are all legal positions and legal identities, and therefore, rights became fixed by law. Universal suffrage, gay rights and civil rights all serve to give the state a reason to regulate the market. The market either self-regulates, or it is corrupted. But what is the market that it is antithetical to the state's regulatory function? What is this thing called the market? Because no one truly appears to understand it. In one sense, the market is privatized, when it is a free market. When the market is a classical free market, it is considered devoid of all regulation and government oversight. But if the market is not being regulated to some degree, what purpose has the government? Let's assume the market could navigate the issues that impact society. If this was possible, the advance of a free market would not just be viewed as an advance in freedom, it would be considered a threat to the state and to the regulated market. We are confronted by all sorts of divisions and conflicts, and it can get very confusing, but there is only one issue and one division, but this division is far deeper and important than people realize. Before we say what this is, let's look at what our own reason can tell us. If a force or power threatened to take everything away from you and you had to narrow your efforts down to saving just one feature you had, what would you choose to preserve? You have sanity, consciousness, reason, as possible choices. These are important, but they are secondary factors. You as a value, as a thing of value. If you had no value, you would not have choices, nor could consciousness exist, nor reason. You have to represent value before you can differentiate yourself from other things and from various possible states of being. When God created us in His own image, He created us as a being with value. We are valuable in His eyes, because He created us, but we do not have intrinsic worth, because there is no way to impress this upon anything else. We are not God, in other words. We can be destroyed because while we have value in God's eyes, this value is conditional upon His love. Our value is dependent on God, not us. This poses a problem, because a man as a physical being is no more valuable than a rock. Therefore, we have to create value. We can do this because we have value in the eyes of God. For this reason, we are not to be slaves or subjects, we are brothers and sisters in Christ. We all have the same value in the eyes of God. This is why we cannot freeload. It is why we cannot be parasites. No one owes us a living any more than we owe anyone a living. To realize our value, we have to work together. We have to cooperate. In this cooperation we create value. The value of man is not personal, it is corporate. Our value is found in our building up of the church. The church is not a thing but a metaphysical construct. It is the idea of us working together to create a civilization. If anything, civilization is a close approximation of what the church is. But civilization is being destroyed. But people do not understand how or why. Due to our modernization and sophistication, we cannot understand men have not changed. We are as Adam. The only thing that is altered is the systems we are in. We think the ancients lacked sophistication and so for the most part, we treat with disdain the idea of demons. Meanwhile, our culture is possessed. There are 10 demons contracting the 10 great evils. The 10 great evils are unemployment, debt, poverty, inflation, pollution, waste, taxation, homelessness, war, and crime. These evils work on us to remove us from God. They are an infection, a possession of the church, mandate, which is why we are told to separate from the state. We need works of faith to overcome this demonic possession of our culture. But underneath these 10 great evils are the 5 demons of liberalism known as Baal, the demon of fornication and sexual licentiousness. Asmodeus, the demon of homosexuality and alternative sexual lifestyles. Leviathan is homosexuality and the masculine principle. This homosexuality is not the classical effeminate form. Another term is suited homosexuality. As those practicing the masculine form of homosexuality generally well-dressed and conservative. Lilith equals feminized seductive, the female principle. Baphomet equals child sacrifice, abortion. As one might have noted, it is the state that contracted out the 5 demons. It is the state that releases the 10 great evils. It is through the state that evil enters the world. The knowledge of good and evil is the state. Adam and Eve took upon themselves the knowledge of self-government, even democracy, which is why they were excluded from the Garden of Eden, no longer being under the jurisdiction of God. This change of administration and indeed, realities, is a metaphysical event, not a physical event. But that is another story. That being said, this was just the initial campaign. We all know something happened at some time to tip things in favor of Satan. This can be narrowed down to a single event that happened at a single point in time. On the 10 sup r equals slow th/sup of December 1948, during its 183rd plenary meeting, the UN General Assembly in Paris released the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In it, human rights were declared universal, no matter where one lives. Article 2, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, birth or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Article 14 everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Article 22 everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security and is entitled to realization, through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. Article 25 everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. In other words, the rights of people who produce value were removed. The right to discriminate based on value was prohibited, and thus, the right to advancement, based on merit, was eliminated. If the worker has no right to his wages, what rights has he? The UN gave rights to everyone to move to safer places and to be looked after. This is the gist of these articles. It does not matter what political jurisdiction you come from, one still has, as Article 22 says, the right to social security and is entitled to realization, through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. The worker is not entitled to his nation or his national integrity. Your history gives you no protections. Because all of your conventional rights were removed, the demons had access to the resources which enabled them to run amok. Once the worker has no rights to his wages, there are no restraints left on the devil. If the worker cannot protect the wealth he creates, there are no restrictions on what the devil can do. The UN was instrumental in eliminating the rights from workers. That is the key to understanding what happened.